I've told you that the tragedy of most of the church at large today is it's not only like we don't talk about money, but we pervert the way we talk about money so that any individual coming in thinks there must be some, you got to get something back, right down to the tax receipt. And I've said this before, and it bears repeating. It has been fought for the right for individuals participating in this ministry to get a tax receipt or tax credit, and then turned around and said, I'm not doing it. He fought for the right to say, I have the right to this, and then turned around and said, I'm not doing it. If you pay your tithes and offerings by check, that's your receipt. And if you're paying by some other method, then I guess you don't have a receipt. But if you're wanting to come into the church and learn, and people say, well, but can't you make an exception? And the problem with that is people don't understand. You open the door to how much money essentially your money, as according to the world, you're giving to the church, which opens the door for other things for Uncle Sam to investigate and look at. Now, that's the other thing my husband fought for, is to keep the government out of the church. So it's really quite interesting how, no matter how people manipulate the subject, if people are just being taught the very simple truth should be sufficient. Come into the church, as we all do, broken, marred, sinning vessels. God's life comes into you, not because you went to wash yourself or change your clothes, but simply because of simple faith and trusting in Jesus Christ. God's Spirit and His new life comes in to dwell in you. And that new life produces a new, if you will, along with reading this book and studying this book, a new understanding of how God's will and God's method with man is carried out. God wants to change us into the image and likeness of His Son. There wasn't and has never been a greater giver than His Son, who laid down His life for you and for me. So that image and likeness begins to take root, which makes you a giver. It changes the hardest of hearts, changes the way we look at things. I've told you many times, I taught on the subject of forgiveness. To an unconverted mind, the subject of forgiveness is a preposterous thing. Why should I forgive? But to the person who's been touched in the heart by Jesus Christ, who reads this book, even though it is still some difficult pathway, God says, I've made a way for you to see what I look like. And when you begin to read and understand my word, and I begin to live in you, I will begin to change you from the inside out, from forgiveness to giving, the A's and Z's of humanity. So thank God I don't have to peddle stuff. I wouldn't want to have to stand here and do that. If that's what the church, if that's what you think the church is for, then, or if that's what I would ever be reduced to, then the church should close its doors. Now, there'll be people who will argue, if I teach out of the book and I show a passage, they'll argue, well, that's this and that's that. They'll have some argument. That's the other thing I'm going to tell you. You do your homework. Be a Berean. Study with me. There are 168 hours in the week for you to log on to the internet and listen to teaching that's going 24 hours a day in multiple streams. You'll hear teaching on giving. And when the Spirit bears witness, it doesn't require some great stretch where you have to imagine that this is what it says. It's pretty black and white. Then an understanding comes that this is a responsibility, and the ability to have that response mechanism should be treated with honor and dignity, not with trinkets and vitamins. So with that being said, with that being said, because I love the Lord, I love His word, and I love His people who have placed their faith, not in Melissa Scott or Jean Scott or a person, they place their faith in this word, that this word is exactly what it says. Christ said, you do your giving in secret, don't make a spectacle of yourself, and you will be rewarded. And the rewards are equally, whether you want to interpret the Greek as in secret or openly, however that text should be interpreted from the original. But there is something attached to that, doing it without the spectacle, without the fanfare, and without corruption and perversion.